Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good middle of the night, whatever time it is when you're watching this, whatever you're watching in the world. Welcome to another wonderful edition of Whispered Insights. According to my producer, Mr. Brent Leary, who keeps track of these things, this is episode 31. Who thought I would have made it this far? Certainly not me, not my mom, not anybody who knows me. But hey, here I am, committed for 31 weeks, plus a couple failed ones, to you, to bring the show back and forth to you, to bring you all these wonderful discussions and all the content that's fit to, what is the thing for the National Enquirer? All the content that's fit to discuss or to publish or whatever. Anyways, all the news that's fit to publish. Welcome. We have a fantastic show today. We have fantastic shows coming up. If I can find the list of the shows coming up, I'll tell you what's coming up, and then we'll discuss today. So let's see. Next week, Lauren Vargas is back, and we're going to talk about the other half of the show that she did with Trisha Wang recently, where Trisha had a wonderful time explaining her perspective on the skills necessary for the AI revolution to continue. We're going to talk to Lauren and get her part of that equation. After that, we have Matt Wilkinson. He wrote a couple books, really good books on CX and CRM. But the one that I want to talk to you about, he wrote a book about uncertainty. And as you know, we are living in the age of uncertainty. So then I want to talk to him and get a few ideas about that. Right after that, we have a little break right now. I'm trying to find somebody. But on the 30th of, the 23rd, of April, we have Doug Searles coming over to discuss the Clue Tree Manifesto as it turns 25 years old. Yes. It's been 25 years since it was first written, and we're going to have a discussion about that. More stuff coming after that with Bob Stutz, Alan Bergson, and some other people, but for the next 3 episodes, that's what we're going to be talking about. Today, we have a really good show. We have a continuation of a conversation we started a few weeks ago with Jon Reed, aka the Brohammer, who's going to be talking about, creating BS filters for the enterprise. He wants to talk about, well, actually, you know what? Let's bring him on and see what he wants to talk about. John?
Esteban, I want to stir the pot today.
You want to stir the pot? That's so unusual for you, though.
Yeah, because I want to maybe take some shots at how analyst firms are coming up short on these topics. And I want to talk about why AI can't help us here. I also want to really talk about the problem with, you mentioned Doc Searles, the loss of the open web versus algorithmic walled gardens that aren't helping us with these problems either. So I think it's going to be a really fun show. But what I really, really wanted to do was to go back to the name of your show, Whispered Insights, because I think why you called the show Whispered Insights is really at the heart of what we need to figure out here. Why did you call your show Whispered Insights?
So, and by the way, when you say Doc Searles and you link it to what we do, and it seems like I actually have a plan to put all the shows together, which is really unusual.
Yeah, it's thematic.
So, I know.
It's thematic.
So, Whispered Insights started for a conversation I have with this really intelligent guy that runs an online magazine called The Genomica. You heard of him? Yeah.
Yeah,
we had a conversation 2 years ago where we started discussing what people can get out of information. And my problem is that in the old days, before the internet, when I was a gardener, and yes, you can start drinking Brent if you want to, but before the internet took over as like the place where everybody goes and posts whatever they want without any qualms about it and with unfettered access to everything, you would actually have people that were smart and insightful that would share their insights. Back then, it was really hard to do personalization for the insights because you barely had time to keep up with all the information coming. But now we got to an age where actually using things like AI, using things like analytics, using things like better access to better information, these people can create personalized insights. And the reason they're whispered is because they're not shut out from the top of the roof to everybody. But I can take information that exists everywhere else. I can apply the information to my clients, to the people that I'm advising, and I can come up with insights that are exclusive to them, and then they're whispered back to them. That's the whole concept of whispering and insights. I mean, that gave birth to the concept of a whisperer, which Alan Bergson, one of my co-hosts, loves to talk about in detail as well. and it gave birth to like some really interesting things that we're starting to see
Right.
happening. So
Right.
yes.
And yet, for the most part, this isn't actually working in real life, with the exception of the kind of personal relationships that you form with certain individuals
Mm-hmm.
enterprise. Then I think it's working if you have a close relationship with them. But for the most part, it's not working. And I want to talk about why that's not working. So,
uh,
so,
yes.
so, one of the reasons it's not working, and going back a few shows now, we talked about this notion of fake news in the enterprise and BS in the enterprise. And that the thing is that in the enterprise, decision makers need better information, which is our saving grace. That's why you and I are still in this game, even though we could do many other things that are more fun. They need better information because the stakes are high, right? You got to have better projects. You got to deliver on those projects, and you're not going to do that without better information. And it can really hurt your career if you get it wrong. If you get,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you get AI wrong and make bad decisions, you're going to have bad results. And then you're going to look around and say, why the hell wasn't I watching Esteban's show instead of drinking the Kool-Aid on this technology, right? So you're going to run into a huge problem there. And you think, well, on the consumer side, I think we're kind of fucked, and that's a whole different conversation, because on the consumer side, people have shown they're willing to actually die for their bad information. See
Yes.
vaccinations and COVID. But we're not going there today. That world is outside our scope. Let's look at the enterprise for a sec here. So the first thing we have to start with, Esteban, is leaders have to buy in to an outside-in conception of leadership. That's the first thing. If they don't buy into that, they're not going to talk to you in the first place, right? So we have so many examples of leaders that become too insular inside of organizations. And honestly, Esteban, we can't help those people. You and I cannot help those people unless they start to perceive the value of it. And so let me just give you a couple of examples of how I think this value can.
Before you get into examples, I
Yeah.
mean, this is a critical point that you raised, because I mean, the people that we cannot help, we're talking about what, 20%, 30%, 60%, 80% of the corporate population. How many people do you think are in that is stuck in the category?
I'm going to say 60 to 65, something in there.
Right.
And
I
then
agree with that. Yeah.
and then I think there's probably about 20% more that are kind of somewhere on the fence there, trying to figure out new styles and open to new approaches, but haven't really nailed it down, or they have too much institutional resistance. And then I think there's a very modest 5 or 10% who actually have the philosophy to do that, and the enough autonomy to do that, and enough budget to make it real. And I think that's a very small percentage.
But for the sake of the argument, it's a pretty standard distribution, right? I mean, we
Yep.
have everything. We have 95% within two standard distributions of the average for the most part, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
What do you think?
I would agree with that. I think that the concept of whisperers, in my opinion, applied really, really well to the long tail, much more than to the early adopters and all that. I mean, early adopters, right. They don't need that, but the long tail, the people that were early adopters, but they like work through it and work through the unique personalized solution, that's where the whispers and the whispered insights actually apply much better. So
right. So here's another problem, which is that in the long tail days that you're describing of the open web, a decision maker could go online and type in some things around why our cloud architecture is underperforming, and they would actually find your blog. Now, independent blogs like that are buried deep in the search. And if you if you go onto LinkedIn, you may or may not see really high quality content on this topic. You're actually unlikely to see it. And do you want to know why? Because in the algorithmic social media era, engagement is a proxy for quality. In other words, posts that have a lot of comments and engagement and shares are assumed by the algorithm to represent quality information. But as you know, in most cases, that's not the case. A lot of these long posts are just, congratulations on your new role. Let me kiss your ass so I can get part of your budget later. Like it's all kinds of crap like that gets the bulk of the attention on our feeds. Now, thank God for live video, right? Because occasionally we can actually get some people watching live video on the algorithm. But, the point is, first thing for decision makers is, if you want to be outside in, do not fall for the idea that the information is going to fall in your lap. You're going to have to set up an information retrieval architecture that gets you better information. We could talk about that. But the second point I wanted to make is that from the vantage point of why should you be an outside in leader? So for example, keep commenting. keep commenting and boost us in the algo. Yeah, thank you for that. So Esteban, let me just give you a couple of anecdotes, and I'd love to hear if you have a couple as well.
Oh, I have plenty, but just so you know, I mean, the last piece of laying the groundwork for this, you and I had this conversation 2 years ago, and I still remember the conversation. I was walking around my neighborhood when I was talking to you, and we were talking about how to make these insights that were coming up on be more. This was actually what created the whole setup for what I'm trying to do these days. And this was 2.5 years ago that we had this conversation, and still to this day, I want to remark that the problem still exists, but it's, if nothing else, it's better defined. But yeah, let's talk about the two anecdotes, examples that you have.
So let me just give you a couple. Let me just give you a couple anecdotes, because so basically what it comes down to is we need some kind of dynamic information network that's also connected to community and relationships, that gives people the information they want, that helps them make better decisions inside the enterprise when they need it. And of course, the fantasy is going to be that AI is going to do that. And of course, you and I know that the AI is not going to do that. We can get back to that. But that's sort of the fantasy, right? And so one of the obvious questions is, well, why aren't analyst firms filling that gap? Because in theory, they are set up to do that, but in reality, they are not. And you and I have a lot of colleagues that we respect that work for these firms. So we know that there's a lot of incredible people working for these firms. But the problem is that so much of what is used to justify the delivery of analyst information is based on either lead generation campaigns or quadrants and waves and things like that. And whenever I talk about the invaluable input that analysts can give, the people that really understand how to quantify this say, "Oh, well, you can't quantify that." So let me give you a couple examples. So I've seen situations where people like yourselves talking with decision makers and basically showing them, "Hey, did you know your competitor has this vulnerability that you could be exploiting in the market that you don't know about, because I just came out of this and understand this better than you?" And I'll see an executive saying, "Oh my God, like we need to change our marketing strategy and go after this particular client." Or the other day I had a thing where I was with the vendor and they were going on and on about responsible AI. And I said to them, you do realize that every other vendor in your space is saying the exact same thing, right? That it doesn't mean anything. So why does that happen? It happens because they don't have an outside-in perspective on themselves, and they think they invented responsible AI while everyone else is sitting on their asses doing nothing.
Yes.
But in fact, all their competitors are doing the same thing. Now, the interesting thing is that every vendor has a different architecture that fulfills responsible AI to a greater or lesser degree, but it's all in the details. And if you can't speak to that and say, "Hey, I know that every other vendor has told you this, but here's why we're different and we're going to show you." If you can't do that, then you're just talking crap. And
Yeah,
the benefit of those conversations, those whispered insights you're describing, is precisely that, which is after that, I got an email from that vendor saying, "You're right. We need to totally change how we talk about this, because we're just contributing to the noise. We're not being specific." They're not going to get that if they don't engage. So we have to prove the value of it. But I would suggest for the rest of this conversation, you and I accept that there's value there, and we start talking about how we're going to deliver it, because I think it needs a different kind of information delivery system than the one we have now.
What is there when you said there's value there? What is there? There's value in the whispered insights. There's value
exactly. So the value being like, I'm going to change my whole way I'm going to talk about responsible AI. Well, how did that happen? That happened because of a conversation. That happened because of a conversation I had with someone outside my organization that wasn't as afraid to speak the truth to me from an informed perspective that I wasn't getting from my underlings because they were busy kissing my ass so they could get their KPIs and promotions.
No, so they can get part of my budget. But sure, let's go with KPI and promotion. Same thing. But the idea here is like, I mean, look at it this way. I mean, I think that the analyst business today is fucked up at the very least, and on its way out at more than likely, right? I don't give legacy analyst houses that publish reports and pretend that they have the answer to the worst problems more than a decade and a half left on this model. If they don't change the way they do things, if they continue to publish stupid comparison tools and focus on vendor selection and focus on like middle of the curve and ladder adoption, then they don't have a lot going on for the foreseeable future. because the world has changed, because we don't have companies that try to emulate each other. We have companies, we have organizations, we have everybody trying to do what is best for them and what they need to do that is different from everybody else. Yeah, the fuck responsible AI. That doesn't matter, man. That's just echo chamber. What the value comes from is somebody who can poke a hole in the echo chamber and let and whisper the inside, if you want to call it that, that actually makes sense. And that's what the analyst firms today, they don't have that understanding. They continue to perpetuate the same model that worked when Gideon Gardner created it 40 years ago. And there's no way that the market today is the same as it was back then.
Right. So, and Alan Berkson has a good comment on curating content is not a skill people have yet, and we should get back to curation because curation is part of this puzzle. But so talking about this analyst firm issue, so part of the problem, to your point, is that analyst firms, by and large, are not providing the kind of expert, truthful information that can really make a difference for customers for the most part. But there are exceptions, friends that we have that we know are doing that, but at scale at the big analyst firms. But the other problem that you referred to is it's too static, right? There's still too much attention paid on static reports and static deliverables. And what we need in our lives now, and what I believe outside in leaders need, if we take that percentage that want to really excel, they need dynamic information delivery in the context that's continuous. And I actually wrote to you before our last show, I think what we're really after is an enterprise context, one that helps us absorb data and apply it. We want a context that is flexible enough to shift quickly, one that can wade through noisy news cycles, and one that balances a hefty dose of skepticism with curiosity for what proper, bold innovation can accomplish. That's, to me, what we want. How we're going to get there is really interesting because folks like Diginomica or you, we have pieces of the puzzle, but what we don't have is a really robust capability to deliver people the right content at the right time in a dynamic way. And the best we seem to be able to get is, I can call Esteban on the phone and then I can follow up on a Slack channel and try to put that together. And that works piecemeal, but it doesn't work at scale.
Yeah, but actually that's a great point, because I mean, when something happens, right? When something happens in the world, we see. I get calls, I get texts, I get emails. Hey, XYZ just released this. What do you think? Right? And in the old days, I used to produce, my thoughts, quick wrap-ups from the quick market wrap-ups. Somebody announced this. Here's my perception. Send it out to a few people, and that was great, right? That was fantastic. But the problem with that is again, that works when everybody in the market wants the same. It doesn't work when everybody in the market needs something different. That little hole that you poke in the echo chamber is going to be different for everybody, and like you said, it doesn't scale. But here's a key question: does it really need to scale?
Only to a point. Only to a point. To a point where multiple people in the organization can experience it, and to the point where you can easily serve multiple stakeholders without having to juggle a million things. My only point is that the technology to deliver this isn't really there yet. And the reason I'm being a bit hard on that is because everyone wants to fantasize that suddenly AI can step in and solve all of our content personalization problems, and it cannot. And I want to get into why, but we have a couple interesting questions here.
I was just going to say, this is perfectly aligned with what you were saying. I mean, Alan says, and I agree, analyst firms are backwards looking. It's like, this is what we have today and what happened in the past, and AI can do that even better. I appreciate that. I totally agree with that. That's what let's not call it AI. Let's call it Gen AI, which is what we're talking about today, right? True AI can do everything, but forward looking is a part that is really hard, and that gets personalized. But this comment from Brett is actually the thing that also dovetails into the discussion that I had with Bob Stutz last week, right? I mean, do leaders need to actually be able to lead? How do you actually ensure that the information that it gets to the leader, it gets implemented properly? That this is the thing. It's not just finding the right information and putting the right information in the hands of somebody. It's like, finding the right person who can lead with that and do something and implement it and actually, make a change, that make a difference.
Right. And in past shows, you and I have talked about cultures of accountability inside of organizations, and culture change inside organizations is important. You can't just have outside-in leaders on an island. And Brent brings up an important point. However, that would take up the whole rest of the show to talk about how organizations have to change, and maybe we can revisit that. I think one of the problems that we have, Esteban, that we need to overcome if we want to deliver these whispered insights in a dynamic way is the fact that community has become so splintered. Because in 15 years ago, I could kind of log on to, oh, I identify with this community, I log on to a forum and we hang out all day and stuff like that. And now people are all over the place, right? And they have very, very different preferences on the types of information they want to consume and how they want to consume it, which, by the way, ties into all your transmedia shows. So if people want to, learn more about that, they should watch some transmedia replays. But
Yeah. You can watch the shows we do with Lauren Vargas and Community Evolution over the time, and how different companies use it and everything. But you're right. I mean, the problem is like the problem. I think that you're coming to the keystone, the capstone of the problem, which is not one simple thing, but it's the fact that it's so, like you said, splinter, not just the communities, but everything, information availability, knowledge, understanding, use cases, case studies. There's so much information that we need to make a decision that is so splinter that you need a whisperer that can put it together and tell you what it means. Because anybody who's been an executive for 5 minutes knows that the last thing I have is time to go and read 20 fucking reports. I don't. I mean, I do because that's my job. You do because that's your job. But like somebody who's running a, like one of my clients the other day, he called me and he said, "Hey, I need you to do me a favor. I'm running a 30,000 person operation and I'm not sure how to communicate better what I'm trying to do." Right? 30,000 people. Do you think they have time to read like a 22-page or even a 1-page report? I mean, give me one morsel that tells me exactly what I need. That's the value to them.
Yeah. And to your point around what you just said, I think you can deliver that. The system works on an individual level in a one-to-one relationship. It still works. If someone knows how to reach you, they can text you, they can call you, and they can get that on a personalized basis. But I'm fascinated by the possibility of trying to create some kind of architecture design that supports these kinds of insights and this kind of interchange back and forth. And so I'll tell you kind of what I'm thinking about, and I don't think it's realistic today, but what I would like, and here's where I do see some Gen AI fitting in. I'd like to see a Gen AI agent that can interact with someone and say, what kind of information do you most need? What's the frequency of that information? What format do you want? What are your challenges? And essentially map that into some type of a knowledge graph or database. Now, what the AI will not be able to do is really know exactly what to send. This is the problem. AI is not smart enough to know exactly what to send to that person. That's where the human curator has to go in and say, here's the curated information that I think you need today in the form that you need it and just the word count that you need and nothing more. And I'm fascinated by the prospect of doing that because at the moment, no one does that. I mean, this whole notion of hyper personalized content is a complete myth at this point. And I'm fascinated by the idea that we could progress this topic and somehow create a meaningful way for people to feel connected. Because like, I still think that feeling of connection is really lacking. It's like you go to an event, you have these really excellent conversations with people that you don't normally see, and then you go back to your job and you get buried again. And very few people seem to have the ability to really keep the thread going. And I'd love to create something over time that makes people feel more connected to me than just a newsletter, for example. Like subscription is the best we've got right now for that.
And this is where you and I started a couple of weeks ago talking about the framework, right? This framework for what you call BS detection, the framework for what I call whispered insights, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same idea. It's how do you get the right people to contribute the right content into a place where, in spite of where I agree with Alan that people don't know how to create content for the most part, but in spite of those shortcomings, somebody can take all this information, say spark some epiphany, and then use that to feed to an executive that's in charge of making a decision. That to me is the value proposition for the internet, for AI, for everything that we've been doing for the last 30 years. I mean, when Gideon Gardner created Gardner, and then the rest of the things, the rest of the companies follow, the whole idea was to provide information that was timely to make a decision. That was the whole purpose of this analyst firms. I don't think they're doing that anymore. I think that traditional legacy analyst firms, and actually, I would even be willing to say everybody who calls themselves an analyst today, what they're doing is just trying to create content at a mass level that can be consumed, without any specific outcome. And I think that the way the world changed, that content just doesn't provide enough value, and we need to get the value that follows up from that content. And
Yeah,
building the framework is the key to getting there.
exactly. And I think the key thing that we have to overcome here is that social media is not our friend here. The social media popularity contest is not surfacing the proper insights that people need, and so we need a way of defining for ourselves quality. So, for example, like if I'm a retail CIO, like I'm going to get a lot more value out of talking with a retail expert, maybe talking with someone like you or me, and then talking with 6 or 8 of my peers. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times vendors fall down here because they're so interested in broadcasting, they lose track of that one of their real value is just putting peers in a room and letting them talk and step the hell out of the way and let those conversations happen. And what I'm seeing is that sometimes these moments do happen on the ground at events. Like some smart vendors actually have pretty good back and forth during
Yeah.
their analyst days and stuff like that. But what happens then is all the threads get lost. And by the time we meet again next year, too much has happened. Too many bad decisions have been made. Too many stupid products have been launched. Too much AI hype has been put out there without accountability. And too many customers are confused and looking at different choices. And it's like, we
Yeah.
lost the thread. We lost the thread.
You can't build a $200 billion+ market without the waste of money. I mean, if you're going to be efficient about everything you do, the market becomes at best a couple $100 million. So I mean, the next magnitude increase in money available comes from the FUD. Building the FUD is everything, right? I mean, the fear, uncertainty, doubt. That's how you actually get people to come and listen to you.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see Marine commenting on the social media popularity contest is not surfacing the insights we need. Marine's really active on LinkedIn, and so Marine has seen this firsthand. And I want to get Marine onto a show again pretty soon. I'll ping you, Marine, on this because I want to talk about how much external data is important to decision making that's not getting accounted for, because that's part of what Esteban and I are talking about
Yeah.
today. Is it's not just the insights, Esteban, it's the data that powers those insights that's not being considered.
Oh,
Marine,
that's a whole different discussion. I mean,
it's a whole
so
different
so,
discussion.
so here's my problem. I've been actually getting closer to that in my thinking and my writing the last few months, but I have nowhere to put that information. I mean,
Yeah,
goes back to what you were saying. If I put it on my blog, it dies. Nobody cares. If I put it on
right.
LinkedIn, I have 3,000 followers in LinkedIn. I don't care about growing followers. I'm not asking for followers. I said, I have 3,000 followers in LinkedIn. My most watched, most interacted posts get 10,000, whatever they call it. What do they call it? Impressions or whatever, right? And a handful of comments and a smear of support. But that's not how you publish this information. That doesn't mean anything. And
Right.
yet there's got to be a lot of value to what you do and to what I do and to what Alan and Maureen and all of us do when we're thinking about this stuff and we come up with these epiphanies that we want to put out there in some work. If we had a framework where our information were to be distributed to the right people at the
Exactly.
right time, then I would do more writing. I would do more stuff. Right now, I just feel like I'm fucking wasting my time every time I write something,
Yep. And Alan's saying that information
Yeah.
sources are one way or too slow to interact. Whisper
Yeah.
fills that gap. And that's actually one reason why I think these modern live video shows like this one are helping us get a little bit back to the conversation we need to have, because it's not just you and me. It's people in our community. It's peers like Maureen and Alan that are going to challenge us during this conversation and be like, wait, you guys are off track on this, or wait, you're right about this. And that's the kind of thing we need to figure out how to simulate, not just in a video, but constantly. And we haven't been able to do it. And it's really unfortunate because everyone is like, oh my God, these social networks are like so, active, and you got to be on LinkedIn to be a factor in your industry. And then you think about like the old days of the blogs where you would have these blog conversations where people would comment and it was highly literate back and
Yeah.
forth. Underneath your blog was all these really super interesting comments, and it was like
Yeah.
the signal of those conversations was so much higher. And like you said, it takes away from your motivation to write when you know you're just dumping your best insights into a friggin' cesspool where it's getting buried by, I'm so proud of my team, we had a cake today to celebrate our 100th client, and blah blah blah, and 1,000
Those
likes,
are
and then
not even the worst. Those are not even the worst. The righteous signaling people that are like, I want to get an ice cream with my daughter, and this is what I learned about enterprise resource planning. There's 3 lessons learned from getting an ice cream with my daughter, and you go like, the fuck, you didn't learn anything from getting asking your daughter. You're just trying to present yourself as an awesome person that like can learn from anything. Anyway, so. And I agree 100% with Alan here. I mean, you need to have, this is what you were talking about earlier, outside in leadership versus inside out leadership, right? So, yeah.
So I actually think while we have an opportunity here, I also think we are. Maureen says it was a great cake. Yeah, yeah, and and honestly, Maureen, it's not even like the like, oh, I'm so proud of my team. We hit our 1,000 sales milestone and we're so awesome. Like, it's not even so much that type of post that bothers me. It's all the likes and shares and comments, especially if it's the CEO doing it and everyone wants business with that person. And then your informational post gets completely buried. And it's like,
that is the biggest problem. That is the biggest problem.
And it's like, why am I even here? This reminds me of high school cafeteria nightmare all over again. Oh, the popular kids are over here, and here you are, like, trying to trade your bologna sandwich for something edible. And that's what it feels like on LinkedIn now.
There's also another problem with distribution, which is in the old days of the blogs, when there was nothing else to steal your attention. Somebody found a good blog and distributed it, through Slack, Twitter, email to the other people, and he would read it because there was no other way. Today, that blog is like trumped 6 million times before it even gets one reader by people that either stole or like shit around with the information in there.
Totally. Like I don't know if you remember this, but Holger Mueller, who's like considered one of the giants in our industry now, like when he went into analyst work for the first time, he just started blogging. And people started sharing his stuff. They were like, this stuff's really good. He just had like a basic kind of WordPress type of blog. And is like, and at that point in time, people would seize upon that information and push it out there and say, this is really good content. And that's what that whole discovery thing has totally gotten lost now. And I really feel for like really smart voices who are trying to get their start, but that's a whole different conversation. But I want to go into a different direction.
But hold on, but stay on that, because those really smart voices become the whisperers. I mean, as you evolve in your career, and the people that listen to you evolved in careers, you cannot do what you used to do. I mean, I used to write for people who were director level and VP level. Now I talk to people that are C level. I cannot publish a 4-page blog or like a 7-part series on how to create the perfect experience that the people that I'm talking to would actually listen to it. It needs to be a different type of information delivered in a different way. And that delivery requires a framework. I mean, both the creation and the delivery requires a framework that doesn't exist,
So it was really interesting because I talked to someone who's an expert in the value of analyst firm activity, because the logical thing is that analyst firms would fill this void, but actually they don't. And one of the reasons is that the kinds of things you and I are talking about are much harder to quantify, and so these firms are not emphasizing them. So for example, like the bread and butter is always the vendor rankings. Our quadrant just came out, our wave just came out, and like all the lead gen that happens around that. And then I did a self-serving report that shows, oh, wow, DevOps is hot, and a DevOps vendor wants to sponsor the report, and that's awesome. And so I did lead gen, and then I did a webinar about it, and that was lead gen. And that's the bulk of what analyst firms end up doing, because that's how they can pay the bills. And then you say, well, what about that anecdote I described where I saw a vendor completely change their go-to-market strategy based on a vulnerability that someone who knew the market better than they did pointed out to them. And like that never gets accounted for because we can't attach a KPI to that and we can't measure that and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and so it's really amazing, because like what you find is that there's a minority of companies that really know how to intake this information and act on it. And then the rest of them are like kind of like, oh, whatever. And so I think it's up to folks in this chat and folks like you and me to figure out a better way to do this, because the analyst firms aren't going to do it.
And this is why we had that conversation too some years ago when we were trying to figure out that model, and we're still going to that. I truly believe that the need has changed and the providers have not adapted to that change, which is very common in enterprise if you really think about it. I mean, it's just that the needs of the masses change, and they do that. And here's the thing. I mean, Sabrina has a really good question, right? The vendors look at the quadrants and ways for marketing material. They do, but what they don't realize is like the call for marketing material, it doesn't exist like it used to. This is the part that I'm talking about. The people who actually consume the information and make decisions based on the information change their requirements and change their needs. And we don't have a dynamic model that adapted to that change.
Right.
And that's what we're still producing, the same thing we were producing 20, 30 years ago, that is no longer valuable. And this is why, you know, people like you and I become more valuable to the people who know us. But it becomes a question of distribution, because a question of scaling and distribution. You cannot scale yourself. I cannot scale myself beyond where I am. I may know a couple handful of people that rely on my advice, and they always seek the advice, and a few of them will pay me for it because they have something more complicated, right? But I cannot build a model, a business that is going to be millions of dollars based on me, no matter how much I try. I came to this crossroads in my career several times in the last few years, and I realized that, yeah, I can bring people and start creating scale, but it doesn't work. I mean, you actually get a better setup with the Genomica than I do individually. But I mean, again, how many people will actually rely on that? That's the key question to all this. Decision making, you know, requires important, accurate information that then needs to be personalized, and the personalization is the bottleneck for this new model. And that's what I like to find a new framework. And by the way, I love this comment that Alan made. He made it to me a few times before. He made it to me so many times that actually I have a T-shirt that says "I am BASF." So just so you know. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and look, I mean, I think one of the reasons why this conversation needs to be surfaced right now is because I spend a lot of time researching AI. I research it much deeper than a lot of my colleagues. But one of the reasons one of the reasons I do that is because I need to know precisely what it can and can't do. And it can do some pretty cool stuff. It can't help us with this problem though, because it doesn't have enough context at this point in time to really understand, like, okay, here's a really good insight. Here's some marketing bullshit. In fact, AI is probably going to lean towards the marketing bullshit because it's going to recognize all the branded keywords in it, and it's going to fixate on those and say, "Oh, well, there's a prevalence of branded bullshit here. This must be, meaningful content." So AI can't help us identify meaningful content, and it can't also generate future advice or insights. It really can't do that. What I think it can do a little bit though is it can help a little bit with signaling. So for example, like it can help identify people who are in more active consumption mode and bring that to your attention and say, hey, this person's consuming a lot of content lately. You might want to get in touch with them. It's really good at identifying patterns like that. But the information content underneath it, that has to be handcrafted by humans. I just think at some point we could figure out some kind of a dynamic platform to deliver this information, but I haven't figured it out yet.
So
Maureen wants to know how.
So Maureen has a segue for the last part of the show, right? But I mean, let's answer this as the middle part of the show. I mean, we started with everything's fucked up and nobody knows what to do. We came to the middle part of the show, which we're wrapping up now, which is, can AI help and what's the new framework? And then Maureen has the key to like the last part, which I want to bring in a second. But okay. I want to answer that question. I mean, what do you think? Will AI change how people think, or just make it easier for them to continue to be in their echo chamber?
Well, the thing is that I think for the most part, AI isn't going to help people discover new insights. I think it's mostly going to, basically at best, it's going to help them be more productive at what they're currently doing. Unfortunately, it's also going to eliminate some of their more mediocre coworkers, and so you're going to have more workload. So your increased productivity may be balanced by increased responsibilities. So I'm not so sure it's going to help there. I mean, what AI can certainly do is say, hey, you like these 10 things, you might like this too. But the problem is, like, that kind of personalization is just like a shot in the dark, and it's not necessarily going to really help you, because I look at this again and again in terms of like, you look at like a review site and it's like, oh, this person, like they use such and such ERP product, but it's like, no, actually they use a very particular product for their particular industry that's configured in a certain way and integrates with certain other products. And they're looking for very specific information only on that. And AI can't do that.
So I think that you have to distinguish between what we call AI and the current model of Gen AI, because I agree with you on Gen AI 100%, right? AI is a bigger thing when you have things like RAG, Mixer, FX experts, advanced models, small language models, and whatever that is not Gen AI, can do a lot of the things you're saying, but it's really, really hard to build the models and then train them and use them and leverage them. So that's the biggest difference. So the Gen AI model we have today, yeah, makes it easier to think the way they already do. The new models that we're going to start showing up towards the end of this year into the next year using different technologies. There's a concept of inference AI that is actually coming out, that is replacement for LLM. There's a RAG, for augmented context. There's a mixture of experts for like smaller solutions in working together in a distributor model. There's a lot of things that are going to be changing that. But that brings us to actually a great segue into like the question that Maureen asked, which is like, let's say that all this stuff is working, right? How do we get the C-suite to prioritize the stuff versus the hype that they're prioritizing and fucking Gen AI and like, making sure that everybody knows that my toothbrush can do AI, like Oral-B is like promoting out there?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think part of it is that when you do find folks that are open to this model, this outside in leadership model, it's really important, and using external data in a more savvy way, all those things. It's really important to document those wins and show that it makes a difference, because if you can't prove it, then you might as well shut up. So part of what we have to do is show that this works better and prove it and document it. So that's one thing. And then there's another group that will try this stuff, but they're not convinced it will work, and they need to experience it for themselves. And so like I see that a lot in the context of my work. And the reason for that is because Diginomica is primarily a media outlet, but we do a fair amount of analyst advisory. But a lot of our clients, for example, when they start with us, don't really know that. And so they've had mostly dealings with bigger analyst firms that do like much more clunkier kind of engagements. And then they'll sit down with us and they'll be like, oh my God, this was really awesome, because we do stuff more kind of organically and more like bite-sized chunks to try to integrate it more into the flow of how people are thinking and executing. So it's like, instead of like, oh, let's do like a whole day session, like, no, let's hit a chunk and then we'll go advance. And so some of it is just giving people a chance to experience that back and forth and see that it can have an impact. And so sometimes people just need to try it. So one of the keys is figuring out how to create opportunities for people to have this engagement experience of the kind of whispered insights you're describing, without having to make a huge commitment to it, but to experience it. And so that's part of it, because some people, when they experience it, they're like, whoa, like, I don't know how to quantify the value yet, but I know that it friggin' helped me a whole lot. And that's a good start.
See, and the thing is, like, I think that somebody said it earlier, and I think it was Brendan. Let me see if I can find it. It was earlier, but something about leadership. I can't find it now, but somebody said, like, that's outside in leadership.
Huh? Oh yeah, he wanted to know about outside in leadership versus the inside leaders. Yeah.
So outside in leaders, need leaders that actually be able to lead, and I think that, to answer Maureen's question, there's two parts to it. One is the education of the inside leaders, the people who actually can lead inside using an outside in advisor like you or I or somebody else. Not that there's too many that are worth it. It's just the two of us. Film at 11. But
and the peeps in the chat too.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, but they do other things. I'm just talking about the whisperers. That's just
yeah.
So, anyways, but the thing is, like, I mean, finding the right people. But this is the part where you and I started talking about the BS detection and the framework, right? To me, the framework is the best way. How can we build something that is not LinkedIn, that is not a blog, that is not a bunch of videos, that can collect all that information so that the leaders who need it can actually find the right people to turn them into whisperers? That's the critical answer to the question. And like, how do we solve this? First, you educate the C-suite to understand that there's a different model and that the stupid information of the past doesn't apply anymore, right? And second, you educate the C-suite, and part of that is you also educate to understand the current use of media and technologies and everything. And second, it's like, we got to build a framework that allows you and I to be distributed better. Distribution is the key to this problem, in my opinion, because you can't get to personalization without distribution.
Yeah, exactly. I would probably I define it slightly differently. I think you pretty much nailed it, but I think education and engagement around that is crucial. The
Mhm.
second is providing some ongoing continuous experiences on a non-scalable way out of that, right? Like where the kind of stuff, the whispered insights that you already do. The third part is thinking about how that turns into a dynamic information delivery / community system. And there's two components to that. One of those is personalization, and one of them is distribution. And both of those are like, it's kind of A and B. And both of those are very tricky because AI isn't as good at the kind of personalization as we would like, although it can help. And then the distribution thing is beyond the scope of AI, because distribution has to do with it used to be
Mm-mm.
it used to be simple, because it used to be like, oh, send it to my email. But now it's like, no, I don't want email, I want this. Everyone has a different distribution and rhythm that they want. And I think maybe part of the key here is some kind of curation, so that instead of just building a whole new system, you're also going back to what Alan was saying and figuring out how to curate existing systems. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of building a new system, but one that also curates. Because, so for example, you're not all going to want to duplicate good stuff on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever it sits. You're going to want to be able to kind of curate all of that in some kind of consumable package that's perfect for the person that you're sending it to. And I think I don't have the answer to that in this episode, but that's where I would want to go with this and try to figure it out. And that's what I'm
Uh,
trying to figure out.
I think that Alan has started that answer talking about the data and accurate data to give value, and curation is
Yes.
part of it, which Maureen agrees with him. But it's like providing a very well presented DEI driven set of emojis that are gender centric. She talks about the Alan nobody having accurate data and Alan agreeing with that, right? So that's basically the problem. But I don't think the answer comes down to the quality and the accuracy of the data. I think that the answer comes, and I may be wrong on this, and I may be pigeon-headed, but I think the distribution is the part that I talked to Brent about it to an extent. I've talked to you. I talked to everybody I can. I think that we need to find a way to distribute this information the right way. I think the personalization helps, but distribution is the core of all this. And I may be a broken record by the end of this show talking about distribution, but it used to be so fucking simple, man. When I started ThinkJar, just put a blog on Twitter. You put your shit on a blog and you tweet about it, and anybody gets it. That was the way back then. I agree with you. There's too many ways today, but
So
need to
one
find
thing.
the model.
So there's one more ingredient we have to add to this list, and we can figure out how it fits in the 1, 2, 3, 4 later. But you hit on it just now, which is you can't rely on discovery anymore. There has to be an opt-in mechanism. So in other words, if someone likes where you're coming from, it has to be easy for them to opt in. And part of that opt-in is core to trust, right? And trust has really become kind of a watchword with all of this, because when I give you my contact information, I'm counting on you, Esteban, to keep sending me the same quality and value that you have. If you suddenly send me like, oh, Esteban's having an ice cream social, 25% off client engagements, I'm like, why is Esteban sending me a commercial? So like the opt-in has to like be consistent in the value, and then you have to
Okay.
keep deepening the trust and getting more and more of that information sharing going between the parties. And so that's a key piece, because if someone hasn't opted in properly and really believes in your value, you can't distribute to them. So, and by the way, first party data regulations also require that now. So
here's the biggest problem. When you talk about personalization, the ice cream social delivered to you is that's personalization. Because at one point you did a search on ice cream, and at one point you did a search on my name. So now we put the two together and we deliver a personalized invite to my ice cream social, because that's personalization.
Well,
it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's crap because it doesn't deliver any value. But that's what we call personalization. We did such a poor job of personalization. And if you're actually looking for information personalization, Graham Hill's series on LinkedIn on how to personalize in this new world is actually excellent when it comes to like understanding personalization better. But we did such a poor job in personalization, such a bad job, that we think that it's about like getting the right coupon to you at the right time versus saying, how do we find the right information to deliver so you can make the decision with the right information at the right time?
Yes.
That context that you're talking about is a critical part of this, and the part that we have no idea how to actually solve.
We don't know how to solve it, but I think we kind of know intuitively what is missing that we need. So we've come a long way from our first conversation on this show. But unfortunately, Esteban, the next part is the hardest part. because
Well,
the next part is proving that this works and showing how it can be turned into something more dynamic and something better than today's social media algorithmic circus, self-celebration, self-promotion festival, but doesn't necessarily get rid of it, because those things are going to persist. But we have
yeah.
to show that there's something better that you can take alongside that.
But let me since we're trying to provide a framework, right? Let me share my framework. I mean,
Okay.
it's in pieces everywhere, right? But here's the idea that I had. Today, distribution is via video. There's no questions about it, right? So everything starts with video, even if you go somewhere else later, because we got to the point that our attention span is like video length, 1 to 2 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour if it's in the background and I can listen to it. I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm driving. If I had video, I could do video when I'm driving, but I shouldn't do that. So I just listen to podcasts. When I'm walking, when I'm driving, I listen to podcasts and I get all the stories and everything. So spoken word basically is the ultimate way to deliver today, right? The problem is like, how do you get the content to that spoken word? So here's how it is. You start with this. You start with like Players Productions Network. You start with like the Genomica. You start with things that actually contains all the information that is actually necessary, right? You find a way to filter that information into like, the 5 to 10 minutes that matter in video, audio, or text format. And once you get to that level, now you have the chunked version that you can actually start, personalizing. They're going from the first one to the second part, going from like, let's create all the content that we need. Let's chunk it out to like, 5 minutes or 10 insights or 5 talking points or whatever. That's the curation that Alan is talking about for today. It's not just finding information, it's about processing into a summarized, into a synthesized version of that. Once you get the synthesized version, then you start doing the part that really matters. Then you find the people that actually, what the problems are, or they know themselves what the problem they have. Then you find a way to align the information using the proper taxonomy from the information that he created in synthesized format to the right person to make the decision, to that person actually doing a further synthesis into getting to like one key question or answer to what they're looking for, and then using that with proper context to come to the decision. It's not that hard to put the framework together. The hard part is actually understanding what's the information that you need, how to synthesize, how to summarize into one key question or answer, and then how to actually get in the right place. So the bottlenecks for me today on that model are not finding the right information, because I can tell you right now, without even thinking, I can plan 6 months of content for this show just on the questions that are in my head and finding people for that. But how do you actually go from that 1 hour to the 10 minutes to the one question to the right person? And the bottlenecks are finding the right person and finding the 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think, and you've covered this off in some other shows too, but I would just add that community is part of that context.
Absolutely.
A community of peers. So like a lot of times the relationships are the containers that allow us to put the knowledge in. So for example, like I just had a really good conversation with a friend of mine about like AI stuff. And so today I was trying to understand like what happens in a case of an LLM when you're using prompts aided by RAG. Does that become part of the training data? And so I had some IP questions. So he answered my question because it was in the context of this relationship that we have that holds all of that. And people really crave this sense of belonging and community in their lives. So part of what we have to solve here is not just one-on-one with Esteban, but how do I also connect to a community of peers and advisors that has kind of a robust experience of that. And you and I have had some of that in the past in our lives. I don't see it as palpably now. I think people are a little more fragmented now. And so part of what we have to do as part of this is to figure out the points in time where we need to then take that information and talk about it. How do we do that without waiting for a show that happens 6 months from now? Because that's totally static. That's legacy, man. That is legacy.
And legacy is how we started today's conversation, right? I mean, do the legacy analyst firms, with the legacy, advisors, do they understand the model and how it changed and what they need to do? And my answer to that is no, they don't, and that's why they have a limited runway. I mean, look, okay, Brent, you can drink again. When I was a gardener, and blogs and social media started emerging, and we tried to figure out how to move from the traditional take 3 months to write a note and edit it perfectly and then publish it and distribute only to people who subscribe, to summarizing that information in blogs and social media. That transition was very, very complicated. And still to this day, if you really think, the good analysts that you follow, they operate outside of the norm of what Gartner does. I mean, the people that go
Oh
on
yeah.
LinkedIn, like Hank Barnes, the people that go on LinkedIn and post their insights and all that stuff, they don't do it within the Gartner model. They don't actually send you to the paywall. Go, if you're a Gartner client, you can get this. That transition is really hard, and that's why the legacy doesn't really understand how to transition to the new model.
Or you take someone like Liz Miller from Constellation, who communicates in
There
this
you go.
really
Yes.
who communicates in this really disarming way that doesn't feel like stuffy or pretentious at all. But then if you corner her, like, she knows her shit inside and out,
Oh yeah.
But she doesn't come off that way. She comes off like really accessible and fun, high energy. Humor is a really big missing piece in all of this, I would say, the satirical element.
Yeah, but the thing, I mean, humor is and simplicity and whatever. I mean, we have a couple of minutes here, and I want to make sure that we stay on track. But the thing is, like, you asked me for a framework. I think that the key to the framework is actually finding the bottlenecks and solving the processes in the bottlenecks. And what you were saying earlier, can AI help me? Absolutely, man. We create this content. I would like, Brent does a good job of putting clips, but I would like somebody to go through all this content that you and I created and the 31 episodes that we created for Whispered Insights, and come up with the 10 talking points, and come up with the 4 minutes that matter from each show, and then put that in a way that is actually taxonomy driven, so that more AI can be applied to find when it applies to what. Make it contextual, make it the right information delivered to the right time, and then at that point we're past AI, finding the right person that is going to consume the information, the right information and at the right time. It's the key to all this stuff. So I think that. Yeah, I mean, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but yeah.
So just real quick, the reason why I've been really pushing back hard on AI in this conversation is because there's still a lot of fantasies with generative AI that it's actually going to generate the content. It's not going to generate this content. Sorry, it's just not.
No.
It doesn't have enough cognitive abilities to do that at this juncture, which is great because we'd all like to make a living. But Esteban, what's really interesting is, like, Brent and I both use a service called Opus Clip to chop videos. The stuff that it does on summarizing videos and giving it a title and and it says, here's why this clip is good and why it's not good, is actually shocking to me. Like, I have to sit down and look at it and be like, holy crap, like, this is actually really good. If you give it the content and say, make sense of it, it's pretty amazing. Now, of course, it doesn't always get it right, but the beauty of the human in the loop design there is I can decide which things to take forward. But blah blah blah, right?
I know, but he's a human in the loop. That triggers me. So I'm just gonna let it go.
but the point is, it doesn't get fired off. I would never want it to just like publish the stuff immediately. I need to see it. You call it whatever the hell you want. I don't care if you call it human in the loop.
No. I think that the concept of human in the loop is a cop out, but that's another show. I mean, we're kind of running in the last minute here, and I want to make sure that I give you the chance to say your summary and your last piece of the day, right? So I mean, we talk a lot about, and we're going to continue to have this conversation. But what's your summary? What's the one sentence for the day that summarizes everything?
Well, I think the big summary is that there's a lot of room for experts in this world to create new models to get information out there with people that care about that information, and we need to invent those models because they don't exist. But it's a lot of fun to make those connections and have this conversation. So let's keep having it. We haven't solved it, but I think we got somewhere today. So even though you don't like the term human in the loop and I can't stand the term co-pilot, but that's for another show.
That's for another show. And with that, one more thing that Brent just reminded me. Thank you. That's not what I was trying to put out there, but thanks, Maureen. Liz Miller will be in the next Players Great Debate. If you missed the last great debate, you should actually go look for it at the Players Production Network on YouTube or on the Brent's profile. It was a fantastic experience of me wiping the floor with a couple of really ill-conceived, analysts from the legacy world. And thank you very much, Maureen, and we appreciate it. And with that, we are out, and we'll see you next week with Lauren Vargas. Thank you.